The rise of Islamic extremism in Iraq, chiefly under the rubric of ISIS, or Islamic State in Iraq and al-Sham, is a catastrophe that the United States needn't have faced had it been willing to live with an aging and disengaged Saddam Hussein. I do not wish to imply that Saddam was innocent of the charges that were thrown at him over the years. He was a ruthless dictator who at times made decisions that plunged his region into chaos and bloodshed. However, in hindsight, the thought of having Saddam Hussein in power seems almost comforting in comparison with the awful events and wasted effort of America's brave young men and women in uniform, not to mention the $3 trillion and still counting we have spent to build a new Iraq. In December 2003 and January 2004, I was the first American to conduct a prolonged interrogation of Saddam Hussein after his capture by U.S. forces. I was a senior CIA leadership analyst who had spent the previous 5 years studying Iraq and Iran. At the start of the debriefings, I felt I knew Saddam, but in the ensuing weeks, I learned that the United States had vastly misunderstood both him and his role as a determined foe of radical currents in the Islamic world, including Sunni extremism. Ironically, while American neocons tried their best to link Saddam to 9/11 and al-Qaeda, Saddam thought that the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon would move the United States closer to his Ba'athist regime. In Saddam's mind, the two countries were natural allies in the fight against extremism, and, as he said many times during his interrogation, he couldn't understand why the United States did not see eye to eye with him. Saddam was a Sunni himself. His Ba'ath Party stood for Arab nationalism and socialism, and he saw Sunni extremism as a threat to his power base. Saddam portrayed himself as utterly fearless, but to my surprise, he told me he feared the rise of extremism in his country. He knew how difficult it would be to use his mostly Sunni apparatus of repression to fight an enemy whose galvanizing principle was Sunni fundamentalism. The Israeli scholar Amatzia Baram has observed that Saddam was always aware of the danger of a competing elite, regardless of its religious or secular sympathies. Saddam believed that there could be only one leader and said, "You must understand, Iraqis are always plotting against you, especially the Shia." If you look at Iraqi history since the fall of its monarchy in 1958, you would have to concede that Saddam had a point. Iraqi politics has been beset by rival factions that have often been at each other's throats. Saddam was often mischaracterized as a non-believer or as someone who used religion clumsily to promote his own political goals. Actually, he was not hostile to religion per se. He just demanded that he be allowed to control whatever religious activity there was in Iraq. Saddam was a believer, but, and this is a crucial distinction, on his own terms. In 1991, after the Gulf War, he brought religion and religious symbols more and more into Iraq's public life. But Saddam's religious tolerance had clear limits. As he said to me during his debriefing, I told them that if they wanted to practice their religion, that would be acceptable to me. But they cannot bring the turban into politics. That I will not permit. Saddam was talking about Shiites, although his injunction applied to Sunni fundamentalists too. In this case, he was referring specifically to Shia religious leaders such as Mohammed Bakr al-Sadr and Mohammed Sadiq al-Sadr, who had chosen to oppose Saddam and threatened his regime with a potential Islamic revolution similar to the one that had overthrown the Shah in Iran in 1979. He had both of them killed. One of the most consequential developments of the past 20 years has been the spread of Wahhabist ideology in the Gulf Arab nations. Wahhabism emanates from Saudi Arabia and seeks to return the faithful to a more austere form of Islam similar to what existed during the time of the Prophet Muhammad. Saddam's understanding of the threat of Wahhabism and his views on the threat of Iranian-inspired terrorism and Iran's ties to Iraqi Shia extremists were particularly cogent and visionary. He saw Iraq as the first line of Arab defense against the Persians of Iran and as a Sunni bulwark against its overwhelmingly Shia population. However, by the 1990s, Saddam began to see the spread of Wahhabism into Iraq and began hearing about Wahhabist cells being created in his country. During our debriefing of the Iraqi dictator, Saddam said presciently, "Wahhabism is going to spread in the Arab nation, and probably faster than anyone expects. And the reason why is that people will view Wahhabism as an idea and a struggle. Iraq will be a battlefield for anyone who wants to carry arms against America. And now there is an actual battlefield for a face-to-face confrontation." Saddam's removal created a power vacuum that turned religious differences in Iraq into a sectarian bloodbath. For a time, Shiites turned the other cheek to Abu Musab al-Zarqawi's Sunni-led atrocities, hoping to win power at the ballot box. But as the death toll rose, Shiite militias joined the fight. In December 2010, The democratic uprisings known as the Arab Spring began in Tunisia, and in 2011 spread to Egypt, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan. Then came the Arab Winter, with a military coup in Egypt and civil wars in Libya, Yemen, and most consequentially, Syria. The civil war in Syria began in March 2011 when President Bashar al-Assad ordered military crackdowns on protests against his authoritarian regime. At first, the government was opposed by moderate Sunni rebels. They were joined a year later by the Sunni Muslim Brotherhood, which was more militant but nothing close to what we would see with ISIS. Sunnis make up 3/4 of the Syrian population, while Assad's Alawite sect, an offshoot of Shia Islam, represents no more than 10%. By the end of 2013, the conflict had attracted units of al-Qaeda and ISIS fighters, which split in February 2014 over questions of tactics and leadership. ISIS proclaimed its caliphate 5 months later, using videos of beheadings and mass executions, the pornography of violence, to attract thousands of new recruits from the Middle East and the West. The rest is grim history. Hundreds of thousands of dead in Syria, half its population of 17 million displaced, the annexation of large swaths of Iraq and Syria by the ISIS caliphate, and the spread of a multi-sided war that has drawn in the United States, Turkey, the Iranian-backed Shia militia Hezbollah, and, perhaps most significantly, Russia.